Bill's fate. And don't forget us, millions of Americans in Puerto Rico right now without power, food, and water. They are begging for help. The Trump administration being criticized for not doing enough.
This is CNN Breaking News.
All of that, but we begin with breaking news. A very, very dangerous accusation just moments ago. A top North Korean official now says President Trump has declared war on North Korea. Over the weekend, the president tweeted, quote, "Just heard the foreign minister of North Korea speak at the UN. If he echoes thoughts of Little Rocket Man, they won't be around much longer," close quote. In light of that tweet, the foreign minister, Ri Yong-ho, says all countermeasures are now on the table, and he says that includes the right to shoot down U.S. bombers flying over the Korean peninsula, even if they do not enter North Korean airspace. Let's bring in Colonel Steve Warren, retired U.S. Army, to talk about this. He's a former spokesman for the Defense Secretary, James Mattis, a CNN military analyst. So, Steve, how serious are the foreign minister's comments? How seriously should the U.S. military be taking those words?
Wolf, we have to take these words very seriously. What went under, if not completely ignored, was that on Friday, the U.S. sent a B-1 bomber and some F-15Cs north of the DMZ off the coast of North Korea. So Ri's comments were really addressing something that had just happened. So when you have a combination of Ri's comments, plus the president's tweet, plus the American flights north of the DMZ, although outside of Korean airspace, what we see here is several events kind of coming together at the same time in the same place. Let's be clear, the United States has not and never has declared war on North Korea here in the last few weeks. But what is also clear is this war of words that you mentioned is becoming more and more serious.
The Pentagon just responded with a statement, Steve. Let me read it to you and to our viewers. The military will take all options to make sure that we safeguard our allies, our partners, and our homeland. So if North Korea does not stop their provocative actions, we'll make sure we provide options to the president to deal with North Korea. So what kind of military options is the Pentagon talking about right now? Because clearly this crisis is escalating quickly and dramatically.
The crisis is escalating quickly and dramatically. And, Wolf, there's a range of options. And some of them that we saw, for example, just on Friday, which is to fly some strategic bombers and some fighter aircraft ever closer and closer to North Korea. This is kind of loud saber rattling. We, of course, could move and position more forces, both sea and air-based, closer to the North Korean country, to the Korean peninsula. And, of course, we can increase the alert status of our forces that are in South Korea. These are kind of the early stage military options that we can take. Much more kinetic options, of course, also remain on the table. We hope it never gets to that.
We know that in the past there have been confrontations between North Korea and South Korea. A few years ago, there was even a shooting of a missile that destroyed a South Korean warship, killing about 50 or 60 South Korean sailors. That was a very tense moment. If something like that were to happen now, is there an escalation that would immediately result in a war? Because this is a very, very tense situation.
This is a very tense situation, and we always hope that cooler heads would prevail. If we fly more strategic aircraft near the North Koreans and they choose to try and shoot one of those aircraft down, this could be a flashpoint. If the North Koreans feel that they're being overly threatened and choose to fire some sort of rockets, missiles, artillery into South Korea and strike American forces. We have just under 30,000, approximately 30,000 U.S. forces stationed in Korea. This could become a flashpoint, which will lead to greater trouble. This is a powder keg right now, Wolf, and this is something that we need cooler heads on both sides to be really beginning to prevail here.
Colonel Steve Warren, thanks very much for that analysis. Much more on that story coming up. But right now, I also want to get to the battle that's raging between President Trump and pro athletes. NFL players and owners say the president is clearly, they say, out of bounds. But the president is standing by his explosive comments about players protesting during the national anthem. Athletes and owners across the league, they responded by protesting the president what he had to say. Some even refused to stand, while others locked arms in a clear show of solidarity. The president set off the firestorm by calling on owners to fire, quote, the SOBs who don't stand during the national anthem. An emotional Miami Dolphins safety, Michael Thomas, explains why he had to take a firm position.
You're the leader of the free world. It's what you talking about. So it as a man, as a father, as an African American man, as somebody in the NFL, as one of those sons of you know, like, yeah, I took it personally, but at the same time, like I said in my Twitter post, it's bigger than me, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's bigger than me. I got a daughter. She gonna have to live in this world. You know what I'm saying? And I'm gonna do whatever I gotta do to make sure, you know, she can look at my dad, look at her dad, and be like, hey, you did something, you tried to make a change. You feel me?
Let's bring in our panel to discuss all of these dramatic words. Jason Reed is an NFL writer for The Undefeated. Our senior political reporter, Nia Malika Henderson. Mike Wise, he's a senior writer and columnist for ESPN's The Undefeated. Christine Brennan is a CNN sports analyst, columnist for USA Today. So, Jason, were you surprised how we see the escalation in the rhetoric involving North Korea, but this has escalated dramatically over the past few days. Were you surprised?
Well, no, I wasn't. Well, for this reason, NFL players are aware of what happened in Charlottesville. They're aware of the comments that the president made about very fine people. And then they see that and they hear that, and then you took a look at their situation, and they're called sons of bees for essentially just protesting peacefully, exercising their First Amendment right, and people who are actually involved in committing violence are said to be very fine people. So I wasn't surprised at all. Actually, on Friday night when this thing started to break, I had several NFL assistant coaches and players who were texting me into the day on Saturday saying they had never seen the level of anger among the players over this situation.
It's not just the players, it's the owners, the coaches. Mike, you've covered the NFL for a long time. It's pretty extraordinary right now.
Well, the funny thing about this whole issue, Wolf, is Donald Trump has essentially galvanized owners and players over the same issue. There was a very big divide between not just whether Colin Kaepernick is re-signed and whether this whole national anthem protest is going to work or not, but most owners would prefer that these athletes stood and didn't alienate any of their customer base, and now they're locking arms with them. Another shocking development, the NFL Players Association president, DeMaurice Smith, and Roger Goodell are on the same page. So everybody has bonded over the common enemy for some reason. And the common enemy, shockingly, happens to be the President of the United States.
NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell. How do you see this, Christine? Because you've covered the NFL for a long time, and pro sports. It's not just the NFL. We saw what the president had to say about Steph Curry and the Warriors.
Well, certainly he has met his match in terms of Twitter followers, decibel level. You know, we know, and this is your area, you know, where the issues over the last, 8-9 months with Trump taking on certain groups. He's never met a force quite like the football establishment and the NBA establishment. I think that's the difference here. They can answer back. They are answering back. As they said, they're unified. But I think it's also, they've got fans not just in blue states, but in red states. And so the demographics of sports and the conversation, the national conversation that we often have in sports, we've had it a million times, all of us here on this panel, well, that brings in people who are otherwise not in these conversations. And that's why I think, frankly, the football players, the NFL won the weekend, and Donald Trump lost the weekend.
But there are plenty of Americans, Nia, you know this, we all know this, who agree with the president. They think it's disrespectful for these players to get down on a knee when the national anthem is being played before a game.
Yeah, and in that way, I think the president thinks he's on safe ground on this. And I think historically, protests aren't necessarily met with open arms, right? I mean, they're called protests for a reason. They're disruptive. They're not like parades that are typically met with cheers. I mean, if you look back at the March on Washington, that people didn't agree with that either. I think 60% of the public didn't agree with that. I think the question now for the country is, what does it mean that the country has a president that so willingly wants to play politics with race, really wants to wallow in a white grievance politics and divide people based on race. You know, in talking to some Republicans, particularly conservative Republicans, they feel like this works for the base. I talked to some black GOP folks who they think they might see some black GOPers at the state and local level leave the party at this point? It's a real question, I think, not only for Trump politically, whether or not it works, is it good or bad for him politically, but what does it mean for the Republican Party brand and the country?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, and Jason and me are this, I think we're lockstep on this. It bothers us, having talked to a lot of athletes, that somehow the notion that this is a protest has become, a referendum over your feelings about the anthem and the flag, when it's been completely reframed. A lot of these athletes, I talked to John Carlos for a column in The Undefeated today. John Carlos, who raised his fist in Mexico City in 1968, said, we were about human rights. We did not hate America. We wanted America to do better. And until people can open their hearts to some of these players and realize that they only want America to do better, they don't hate the country. And I think that's a big difference.
Yeah,
that's a big difference.
Yeah. And that's a form of patriotism too, right? I mean, asking that the country live up to its ideals. I mean, that's essentially what Martin Luther King said and did when he had the march. Exactly. I mean, it isn't just that soldiers are patriots and first responders are patriots. There are other forms of patriotism as well.
And this is a First Amendment right. I mean, I think that's been lost in this whole discussion. And the people who are booing the players, the reality of it is they're exercising their First Amendment rights. So, can we at least get on the same page that these peaceful protests are totally lawful and they're not against the NFL-CBA. So when we talk about what these players are doing, you can have a problem with their politics. I don't take issue with that. But you can't have a problem that what they're doing is against the law. And that's how this thing is being framed. Like suddenly they're doing something that, well, is against the U.S. Constitution. No, this is what the U.S. Constitution is about.
But don't you think, I mean, look at the ratings. The ratings went up, right?
Right.
People tuned in like crazy to the pregame shows. Now, that's obviously both ways, right? You could have people who are angry about this.
So Colin Kaepernick can now make people money?
Right,
I
he's
did
making
not
people
know
money.
this.
Yeah, when is Colin Kaepernick going to be signed? That's maybe another issue, too, because now, oh, by the way, Colin Kaepernick's your problem? I don't think so. But I do think it's interesting because one of Trump's main arguments, Wolf, was that, oh, people are going to turn it off. They don't care. It's a business argument, right? Well, he's wrong on that, too. Quite the opposite. They made more money yesterday, the owners said.
Is there a racial issue here in this whole uproar that has developed? I don't know the exact statistics, but I think about 70% of the NFL players are African-American. I think about 80% of the NBA players
about 74%.
are African-American. How do you see this? Because some have suggested, the president says this has nothing to do with race, but others have suggested it does have something to do with race.
Well, I know just based on my reporting, talking to African-American players in the NFL, they feel it's totally about race. The initial reason that Colin Kaepernick knelt was sat and then knelt, was to draw attention to the oppression of black people and brown people in the U.S. And if you can't get on the same page that there are differences within the black community, how people are treated, policing issues, criminal justice issues, then we can't even have a dialogue because, I mean, these are just facts. And yes, so when you talk about is this issue around race? Of course it's around race.
And the guys who are essentially protesting are almost 99% African American. When you're calling them SOBs and you're questioning their employment,
and you're talking about their mothers.
And you talk about their mothers in that quote. I mean, it's like Lorenzo Alexander, a friend of ours and a guy for the Buffalo Bills. He was totally on the fence against this, and Trump galvanized him to kneel with his teammates yesterday.
I want to just read the tweet from this morning. He's done a few of these tweets. This is the president. The issue of kneeling has nothing to do with race. The president tweeted, "It is about respect for our country, flag, and national anthem. NFL must respect this."
Yeah, and I mean, this idea that it's not about race, he also tweeted about NASCAR, right? Praising the sport of NASCAR, praising the fans, and of course, NASCAR is overwhelmingly white, the drivers as well as the fans. So it's hard not to see.
This is the tweet on NASCAR.
Right.
So proud of NASCAR and its supporters and fans. They won't put up with disrespecting our country or our flag. They said it loud and clear.
Yeah, and so, I mean, that's why it's hard not to see sort of the contrast here. I mean, the sort of race-based, kind of conversation that he is inciting in the division here.
And when you talk about NASCAR, what do we see at NASCAR? More flags?
Confederate
flags. Yeah. It's not the U.S. flag. It's a Confederate flag. I mean,
which they apparently banned on the track, but all the tailgaters, a lot of them still use.
And so not only, look at what we just talked about, race, all race-related, whether it's history, Civil War, and Confederate flags, which is, of course, NASCAR. Who was he praising is coming to the White House? The Pittsburgh Penguins, the NHL team. That's great. They have every right to do that, of course. That's fantastic if they want to go. But the NHL is probably 98% white. So
the Warriors have been disinvited.
And, of course, they're from the NBA, which is 78% African-American. So here we go. Every single point we're making here, there is a kind of a common denominator.
You wanted to say something, Jason?
Well, I just think that when you look at the NFL and you look at where things are in the league right now, just talking to assistant coaches and talking to players, the level of anger has never been higher. And again, I go back to Charlottesville. If the comments had not been made about very fine people, and then on this end you have the comments being made about mothers and get them out of here and fire them, I mean, it's very hard for these players who are these guys are thoughtful and they do think about things and they do have families. It's very difficult. We saw the clip of Michael Thomas. It's very difficult for them to accept that what is being talked about is not what's being talked about. So.
All right, guys, a good conversation, good discussion. This conversation, though, is not going away. Jason Reed, Christine Brennan, Mike Wisney, and Malika Henderson, all thanks to you. So how will the White House react to all of this? The White House briefing moments from now. We'll have live coverage right here on CNN. Stand by for that. Plus, as more Republicans come out against the latest health care plan, I'll speak live with one of the bill's co-sponsors, Senator Bill Cassidy. He's standing by live. Is he closing in on a surprise 11th hour deal to try to pass it? And breaking news out of Puerto Rico right now. There is a human catastrophe that is unfolding right now. A dam on the verge of collapsing. Millions of Americans, 3.5 million Americans are in Puerto Rico right now. They are all U.S. citizens. They are begging the Trump administration for more help. CNN is on the ground. We'll update you on that when we come back.